Welcome to Moments with Marianne. Allow me to interrupt your train of thought with something that may be one of the most interesting things you hear today. This is Marianne Pastana, and we have two very special guests today. Our first guest is Claire Nelson, and she's here to share with us her memoir, Things I Learned from Falling. Now, in 2018, writer Claire Nelson made international headlines when she fell over 25 feet after wandering off a trail in Joshua Tree. The fall shattered her pelvis, making her completely immobile. And there Claire laid for 4 days, surrounded by boulders that muffled her cries for help. So let's welcome to the show, Claire Nelson.
Hi, thank you for having me.
What an honor it is to have you here and to talk about your journey. My goodness. I mean, when I was reading your book, I was really surprised at just the journey that you took. Why don't you share with our listeners a little bit about your journey?
Yeah, sure. It's funny. It's a journey that started. It was a journey that started within myself, as journeys tend to do, and then took me to another physical place. So I was living in London, and by all accounts, I was living a life that I had built for myself, and that was everything that I wanted for myself. I'm originally from New Zealand. I wanted to be a travel writer. I'd made all of that happen, and yet I found myself at this point when, if I looked around at my life, it was everything that I'd hoped it looked like, but underneath it, there was really nothing that was fulfilling me. So my mental health really began to sort of suffer, and I began to struggle over time. And I did that very, the very typical thing that a lot of people do is to, put on their face of, I'm fine, I got this, I don't need to talk about it with anybody, and just kind of burying it and burying it and burying it and burying it. And when everything around me started to crumble, everything within me started to crumble, and I was finding myself struggling mentally and emotionally, my instincts were to reconnect with nature and to kind of leave everything behind and go into a world where it was just me and the natural world. So I moved to Canada, almost not really as much on a whim, I think, as anyone can just move country. But it was a decision that once I'd made it, I knew there was no stopping me. And so I thought I would go to Canada. I will be in the mountains. I will immerse myself in what I like to call big nature, and sort of maybe try and figure out what's going on with all this noise in my head and why I'm feeling so unhappy and depressed. And it was then that I got an invitation from an old friend to come down to Joshua Tree in Southern California and house sit for them. And I thought, well, this is great. I can do some hiking in the desert and definitely immerse myself in that big nature that I was looking for. So I took this as a sign, that I'm going in the right direction. So I found myself in Joshua Tree in May of 2018.
Well, Joshua Tree, I mean, I know we were talking about this just a little bit ago. I mean, it's some really unforgiving territory. While it's really beautiful, I mean, the surroundings are so unforgiving.
Absolutely. It's desert, so it's such an extreme and harsh environment, and everything that's designed to live in the desert is, it's very well adapted to it. And suffice to say that we as human beings are really not so much adapted to life in the desert.
I know I've been to Joshua Tree a few times, and if you don't have tons of water and a way back home, it can be a little scary.
Absolutely. And, I think, with something like a national park, I think too many of us, I'm definitely speaking for myself here, kind of have this sort of voice in the back of your head that's like, it can't be that dangerous because it's a national park. So you sort of feel like someone's in charge, right? And it's only really in hindsight that I understand that the national parks are places where the land is protected, but we're still in the wilderness, and we're still as prone to, the same dangers and the same risks as if you were just wandering into uncharted territory.
Well, I know that, during your hike, some things happened. And I'd love for you to share with our listeners just how things how things progressed to the way that they were.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was throwing myself into doing day hikes, and I started with smaller day hikes, but I was really itching to do a full day's hike, and I picked a specific one that leads to this. It's an hour and a half drive across the park to the southern side of the national park, and then the trail itself is about a 4 hour hike, and so I set off on what I thought would be the quietest day of the week, early in the morning, to try and get ahead of the heat. And I was really pleased that there was no one else around. I just wanted that solitude. And it was while I was about, between mile one and mile two, I had come off the trail. I didn't know it at that point, but I'd come off the trail, and I was wandering further and further away. And I reached a point when there was a bit of a rock scramble, which I knew was part of the trail, so I wasn't surprised by it. Still thinking, of course, that I was on the trail. I climbed to the top of a boulder stack, and was trying to make my way down the other side when I slipped. I lost my footing. I fell to about 25 feet to the ground and so badly injured myself. I'd broken my pelvis and was rendered immobile. I couldn't move and couldn't get up.
Oh my gosh, that must have just been so scary to go through that because I mean, you're a mile in the desert, looking
Yeah.
looking at everything. And I know, I mean, it wasn't just like you just went and took off. I mean, you kind of researched it. You understood that this trail would be kind of moderately hard.
Yeah. I mean, I felt really comfortable. I think that was part of the problem, is that I was in my element. I mean, I always feel more at ease in the outdoors for various reasons. And then, of course, I had been, spending already a week and a half in the desert, so I was used to the terrain in my mind. And I had asked the ranger before I set off, like, what to expect on the trail, and he'd mentioned scrambling. So I did not feel at any point that this was risky. And so I think when we don't sense risk, we don't take the sort of extra level of caution and preparation that we might otherwise.
So did you think that you were going to die in the desert?
I did. It was one of those things that if you are, if you hike often, or if you're in the outdoors often, you hear stories of this happening to people. And, I always thought, that it won't happen to me. But I know that people die, and I knew and you already knew people that died in the national park from various incidents. And so once the realization of my situation hit me, so, I couldn't move, then I realized I had no phone signal out there, so I couldn't call anybody at all. Of course, I realized I was at least a mile off the trail. And then, of course, it occurred to me that I hadn't told anyone where I was going, which I knew better than that. But of course, I just got so comfortable, and I hadn't done that, hadn't told anyone. And because I was in a foreign country house sitting, no one was expecting me back. So when those realizations hit me, immediately I knew I've put myself in the situation where I'm going to be one of those people who die on a hike. And that was a really difficult thing to try and digest.
That must have been just so challenging. I mean, you know the rules, you're an experienced hiker, and why do you think you decided to go without telling anybody where you would be?
It's a really good question, and I've had to do a lot of soul searching since that day, and it made me realize a lot of things. One of them being that I had always put the sense that I was an independent, self-sufficient woman as kind of the pinnacle of strength, and I didn't need anybody else, and I, didn't ask for help, and I didn't let people know where I was going. I was very much driving my own ship, And of course, there is such a thing as over independence, and kind of going too far that way, where you keep everyone else at arm's length, and then you realize actually we need other people. And by my avoiding meeting any other people, and keeping my lines of communication sort of really haphazard, when I actually needed to reach out to people and couldn't, it was my own doing. I mean, I've just spent my whole life very much fending for myself, and thinking that that was the best way to do things.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to kind of look at that because I think all of us can relate to this where we get to this point where we're like, I am so independent. I don't need anybody. But there's a lot of times that we do.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I know it's a very, very common trait, and I know particularly with women that we're not very good at asking for help, because I think that what it does is it almost, it's almost like there's a sense of that if you're asking for help, it means that you can't handle it yourself, and it makes you a bit more vulnerable, and it can maybe be perceived as weakness, and you don't want to show that you can't handle it. So we're terrible at, and plus we're afraid of being rejected when we ask for help. So there's all of these underlying fears that stop us from reaching out and connecting with people and asking for their help. And that's really problematic because we need more, we need other people more than we realize.
Without a doubt, and especially in situations like this. I mean, so for the people who are solo hikers, what advice would you give them today?
I mean, absolutely, the number one rule is to let somebody know where you're going and what time to expect you back. And I mean, in New Zealand, we have a lot of people who come over to New Zealand and they don't do that and they get into trouble. And I would read the papers and think, gosh, don't they know that they're supposed to do that? And then I didn't, because to my mind, I was going into a national park just to do a small hike. And so it doesn't matter where you're going. You could go down to the local forest for an after dinner walk. If you're going by yourself, even if you feel a bit silly doing it, just tell somebody, because you never know if you're going to get into trouble. And it'll be the one time that you don't, that you realize you should have let somebody know.
Yeah, I think that's such great advice. I could follow that myself. There have been a few times I've gone hiking by myself. I haven't told anybody. It was just me and my dog. And it's like, oh, we got it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah, exactly. And then
until we don't got it, right?
until we don't got it exactly.
So I understand you spent 4 days and 3 nights in the desert. That must have been so scary. I mean, you've got tarantulas, you've got
Oh,
rattlesnakes that are there, you've got, big, the coyotes aren't really that big in California, but you got coyotes that are running around. So you've got all these and mountain lions, you've got all these predators in that kind of area. So how did you feel through all this? I mean, that must have just been so scary.
the first night was without a doubt the scariest night of my life. I mean, I went from sort of in my head being like, I've injured myself on a hike, in the light of day that feels like, well, this is bad, this is serious, but it doesn't feel as serious than when the night starts to creep in and it's starting to get dark and you're still lying there in the dirt and you can't move. It's like, oh, this is a really serious situation now, and all you have to do is to wait. It's getting dark. You have until the following day, or you just have to lie there and wait it out. And I didn't know what was going to come out at night, and even the things that I knew might not come out at night, like snakes. It didn't matter to me what the logic was, because fear it just takes over everything else. And when you're that vulnerable and you're in the dark, which also does something to your mindset, man, I did not sleep really. It was a night spent of completely being on high alert the whole time.
Yes, and I know that that's so difficult because you were really surrounded by these boulders. You're in an
Mm.
area that barely fit you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, on the one hand, I mean, I'm very grateful they landed on a flat clearing of ground. It could have been a lot worse. But yeah, I was sort of swallowed up by this small circle of these towering boulders, and so I was just kind of, yeah, swallowed up by the desert in a way.
So who sounded the alarm that just something wasn't right?
The friends I was house sitting for, they were overseas at a wedding, and they know that when I'm traveling, pretty much the only way that people really sort of kept track of me was that I would post on Instagram and let people know what I was up to. So that was really the only way I was connecting. So when I went quiet on Instagram, which always I feel so ridiculous every time I say it, but we're here, and that's what we do. But yeah, they realized I wasn't posting, and then they were texting me, and I wasn't replying, and so they knew that was a bit odd. And so they got friends to go around to the house and just see if I was there. And they're like, no, she's not there. The car's not there. And it says on her calendar that she was going to do a hike last Tuesday. And so that's when they called search and rescue. And they said, we think our friend might be in the national park. Can someone go check?
Well, thank goodness, thank goodness for all these ways that we connect with people. You can have friends in London who are telling people, hey, you need to go out and search for my friend.
Yeah, exactly.
I just love that. It just has you kind of thinking, man, all that time that you spent in the desert by yourself, I understand that you came to this point where you really had something life-changing happen.
Yeah, I mean, the irony is that I left London because I was feeling like I had to sort some things out within myself, and I wasn't sure what that was. I just knew that something needed to change, and that I needed to kind of approach my life in a different way. Obviously, I'd never in a million years expected to be stranded in that situation in the desert in California. But it sort of it fast tracked a lot of that process for me. And I had to have a really long, hard look at myself and my life in the face of thinking I would die, and think, well, what would I have changed? And that sort of everything was really clear to me then that I need to connect with people in a better way, and I need to connect with myself in a better way, and not be so so hard on myself and so full of shame of the parts of myself that I didn't like, and trying to hide those from people. And just the sort of presenting myself on, say, like social media, and just my best side, and then hiding this other side of my more vulnerable and this other side of myself. And that it was stopping me from getting close to people as well. And the more I picked away at these threads, the more everything started to make sense. That I can see where I was going wrong, and oh boy, if I only had another chance to do it, I would deal with that better.
So has that entire experience just radically changed your life today?
It's radically changed my life, not because I'm suddenly armed with the skills I need to live my life differently, but because I can see what I need to do, and I can I can work towards those things. I mean, it's a life of living your life in one way, in these mindsets that are ingrained, and the amount of things that hold me back that are fear-based, I can see all that now. So that's kind of the first step. And in the 3 years since the accident, I've been, it's a slow process, but beginning to unlearn some of those bad habits, or unhealthy habits, and moving towards something that feels a lot healthier and a lot happier.
I know you go through this amazing rescue that they talk about, in your book. You talk about in your book, and we'll save that for our readers. How has recovery been for you? Because I mean, that must have been just so hard, because you had I believed it was, several bones that were broken, including your pelvis.
The shattered pelvis was the phrase that really fit that. It was, and I had a fractured foot and a badly sprained ankle, and it's still kind of remarkable to me that I literally have walked away from the accident, and the worst outcome physically I have is I still have pain in my hip, and I still have pain in my ankle, but it doesn't stop me from doing everything that I like to do. But that's one of those things that pain will kind of, I have to manage that over time. And then everything else, sort of the mental and emotional side of it, I still feel like, I'm sure that process is going to be long and ongoing. And, I don't know that life has necessarily come back to anything resembling normal since the accident. So that's also, it's been both helpful and a hindrance to seeing how that experience can help me in my life going forward.
Oh my goodness, what a realization you had just with being able to see things in a new light, because everything's based on how we perceive things. And that really allows you to shift not just your perspective, but how we do things as we go forward. And I think a lot of people are looking for that right now.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's only been this past year that I've really realized that what I was getting away into nature to do was to get away into solitude. And then that's because all the value that I was putting on myself and my life was based around other people's perceptions, these external validations and external perceptions, and not really focusing on my own self-perception and self acceptance and all of that. So having to kind of really shift the perspective, and look at things differently. And everything in life it helps if we see things from different perspectives from time to time. But the way we see ourselves, I think, ultimately will be the greatest perspective shift we can ever have.
Yeah, that can be such a game changer for anybody, is being able to do that.
Mm.
One of the things I was really fascinated about is some of the videos that you've done. And I know you talk about stop pretending in one of yours, and I would love to have you share that with our listeners.
Yeah. I mean, the video, I filmed the first video just as like a letting people know what had happened. And then I found myself turning to these videos, turning to my camera to make these videos is a way of consoling myself and feeling like I was being seen and heard when I was so far from it. But even then, it was really weird to me that when I watched them later, I was like, wow, I was still holding back. Like I still didn't want to look silly by showing myself as being completely vulnerable. I still didn't want to show my emotions fully. It was like, wow, I've glued my game face on like early on in life, and I've just not taken it off. And boy, I really should have a think about why I'm doing that and what purpose it serves me.
Yeah. And I think all of us need to kind of take a step back. We don't have to go through a traumatic experience to really think about how we can live life differently.
Absolutely. And I think, a lot of it comes down to really understanding how much of the decisions we make are not about trying to be strong. It's actually that they're fear-based. We hold ourselves back in so many ways because of things that if you strip it right back, it's just fear. And that's not the kind of fear that keeps us alive. That's the kind of fear that holds us back. And now that I've experienced sort of life and death fear, I can see now that all the other things that I was, that were holding me back in my life that I perceived was me being in control, was actually just me being afraid and avoiding the things that were scary to me.
I mean, when we have traumatic events that happen, it really gives us a chance to look at our lives as it is, and should we make it through, have the possibility to make dramatic changes.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, no one wants to look back at their life and think, wow, I wish I hadn't been so afraid all the time. It's a real punch to the gut when you realize that's how you've been living your life.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to do that. I know in your book you have a whole section for safety tips for hikers.
Mm-hmm.
And I really appreciate that because, I think a lot of times we need to kind of, kind of just remind ourselves of some of the basics.
Yeah. I mean, I was really, really adamant I wanted to add safety tips in there because there'll be things people knew, but there'll be lots that people didn't. And, I mean, I'm not special in any way. I am a person who loves to be in the outdoors. I'm like anyone else who likes to be in the outdoors. And this happened to me. I'd want people to remember that, it can happen to anyone. And as I say in the book at the end, it's like you can be prepared for anything, but you can't be prepared for everything. And so just kind of remembering that can just be so helpful as well, that we're not invincible.
Yeah. I mean, it really kind of puts things in perspective. I mean, my goodness, Claire, I mean, it's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your journey. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your work?
Well, I mean, as much as I hate to say it, I'm easiest to contact on Instagram. It served me well, and so people can find me there, and I'm always happy to hear from anyone who wants to reach out and if they have any questions.
Well, Claire, thank you so much for taking the time to be on a show with us here today.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Claire. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Things I Learned from Falling. Things I Learned from Falling's available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and select indie retailers. And of course, if you don't see it on the shelf, ask for them to order it. Make sure to support our indie bookstores. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.